Take a look around you right now. You see physical objects, right? A screen, a desk, the walls, all of it governed by strict rules of gravity and physics. But then, inside your head, there's this entirely different universe playing out. You've got thoughts, feelings, moral choices, and this right here is the ultimate reality glitch. Like, how does a physical brain, which is basically just made of squishy wet matter, actually create completely intangible thoughts? Well, today, in this explainer, we are unpacking a breathtaking philosophical masterpiece. It was published way back in the year 1800 by a 25-year-old prodigy named Friedrich Schelling, and he claimed that he had actually solved this exact multi-trillion-dollar puzzle. All right, let's jump right in with Section 1, the mind-matter divide. To really understand the impossible dilemma that young Schelling inherited, we have to look at the philosophical war zone of late 18th century Europe. Let's do a quick experiment together. Look at your physical surroundings again. That is the objective world. It's matter, physics, gravity, and complete determinism. Honestly, it doesn't care about your feelings at all. It just exists. Okay, now close your eyes and focus on your inner thoughts. That is the subjective world. That's your mind, your morality, your free will. And experiencing both of these back to back really highlights the staggering, almost unbelievable contrast between these two realms. Okay, so let's frame the big multi-trillion-dollar question here. If mind and matter are completely different substances and they operate under completely different rules, where exactly do they meet? How does a physical brain made of wet, squishy meat generate an intangible thought like love or justice? And on the flip side, how does an invisible thought somehow cause your physical hand to reach out and pick up a coffee mug? Historically, this massive divide created a total crisis. Back in 1781, Immanuel Kant basically created an unbridgeable canyon. He argued that we can never actually know the outside world as it truly is, only as our mind filters it. Then, a decade later, Johann Fichte pushed this to an absolute extreme, claiming the outside world doesn't even exist. He said it's just a hollow mirror universe projected by our subjective egos. But then we hit the year 1800, and Schelling steps in. He looks at Fichte and says, okay, that's absurd. Nature isn't just an illusion or some dead puppet show. Schelling made it his ultimate mission to prove that mind and matter are actually one single, beautifully unified reality. Which brings us to Section 2, climbing the two mountains. To bridge this totally impossible canyon between the subjective mind and the objective world, Schelling came up with a genuinely brilliant foundational metaphor. He realized that you basically have to launch an expedition up the exact same mountain, but you have to do it from two opposite sides. First up is nature philosophy, or the philosophy of nature. This path starts with solid matter and traces how it evolves upwards into consciousness. It's kind of like solid ice melting into water, then into steam, and finally becoming an invisible gas. The second path is transcendental idealism, and this does the exact reverse. It traces how pure, invisible consciousness actually involuntarily constructs the physical world around us. Think of that like invisible gas freezing back down into solid ice. When both of these paths finally meet at the peak, you realize, oh wow, they're describing the exact same underlying reality. I really want to pause on this monumental quote for a second. Schelling wrote, "Nature is visible spirit. Spirit is invisible nature." He is telling us here that nature isn't just dead, dumb rock. Rather, nature is consciousness in a frozen, sleeping state. Over billions of years of evolution, going from minerals to plants to animals, nature is just gradually waking up until it can finally look back at itself through human eyes. But to truly understand how the mind builds reality, we need to understand its core engine, which Schelling calls intellectual intuition. Right now, as you're listening to this explainer, I want you to think about your self-thinking. Notice what just happened there. The thing doing the thinking, you, is identical to the thing being thought about. The subject and the object completely collapse into one infinite ongoing event of self-awareness. But here's the catch. For this infinite stream of mental activity to actually feel itself, it needs a wall to hit. It needs a limitation. And that leads us to Section 3, the three epochs. This drops us right into the absolute core of Schelling's system. This is where the mind creates those limitations and starts unlocking higher levels of reality. Honestly, it's a lot like leveling up in a really complex video game. He maps out this journey using a very structured roadmap of 3 distinct steps. We start at sensation and move to inner intuition, then intuition to reflection, and finally, reflection to absolute will. Let's walk through exactly how human consciousness evolves from a blind, completely chaotic state into fully self-aware moral beings capable of shaping the entire world. Okay, so in the first epoch, imagine being a newborn baby. You're experiencing this chaotic warmth and light, but you have no idea where your body ends and the rest of the world begins. Schelling says the mind has this infinitely expanding force, but to avoid just expanding forever into complete nothingness, it unconsciously throws up a limiting, restraining force against itself. When these two opposing forces crash into each other, the impact is raw sensation. Basically, the mind unconsciously limits itself just so it has something solid to feel. Now, once the mind actually has these inner feelings, it moves to epoch 2 because it needs to organize them. To do this, it builds space and time. Space and time aren't physical boxes out there in the void. They are literally just the lens system that your mind built to keep all these sensations from hitting you all at once. And what about physical matter? Well, matter is simply the mind's inner forces of expansion and limitation being projected outward. It manifests as that dynamic physical balance of attraction and repulsion that, actually holds atoms together. Now check this out, because the direction of reality flips entirely when we hit Epoch 3. In the first two epochs, the physical world dictated terms to the mind, like you passively adapt to the reality of a giant rock being in front of you. But in Epoch 3, the mind dictates to the world. You form a conscious idea in your head, and then you force physical reality to adapt to that idea. This gives us practical action, and most importantly, it gives us free will. But this introduces a really grand paradox. Because if everyone has free will, why is human history such a chaotic mess? Why do our conscious choices constantly lead to completely unintended results? Well, Schelling argues that history actually functions like a giant theatrical play moving toward ultimate harmony. During the ancient period of fate, blind forces ruled everything. Then, in the period of nature, massive empires enforced strict scientific law. But he says we are collectively moving toward the period of providence. This is a future harmony where our individual free will unexpectedly aligns to create grand historical destinies, all guided by an unseen, unconscious hand. Now for Section 4, Art as Ultimate Truth. We have finally arrived at the massive climax of this explainer. This is the 1800 bombshell idea that completely shocked the intellectual world. It literally turned Schelling into a romantic superstar, all because he crowned art, not science, not logic, but art, as the ultimate instrument of philosophy. To get why he did this, let's contrast how a masterpiece is actually made. On one hand, you've got conscious craft. That's learning geometry, color theory, grammar. It's the logical hard work of technique. But craft alone can feel totally dead inside. True art requires unconscious inspiration. It's that elusive flow state, the genius, where pure emotion takes over, and an artwork seemingly just creates itself through the artist. So the crucial point here is captured in this beautifully simple equation. True art equals conscious craft plus unconscious inspiration. In a truly great work of art, conscious intent and unconscious nature fuse together seamlessly. True art achieves in a single instant what philosophy struggles to explain over thousands of agonizing pages. It perfectly fuses the infinite, free spirit inside finite physical matter. For Schelling, art is the mirror in which the absolute finally looks at itself and smiles. However, I do have to mention a bit of a historical tragedy here. See, Schelling's college roommate was a man named Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And Hegel eventually threw some massive shade at Schelling's theory of absolute identity. He famously mocked it as the night in which all cows are black. What Hegel meant was that simply blending mind and matter together was kind of a lazy shortcut that skipped over all the painful historical contradictions of reality. And honestly, this brutal critique completely overshadowed Schelling's work for decades. Let's move to our final section, Section 5, Why Schelling Matters Today. Now, you might be wondering why on earth we are digging up these airy philosophical concepts from over 2 centuries ago. Well, it's because Schelling's ideas actually anchor directly to the extremely tangible, high-stakes problems we face right now in the 21st century. Look at neuroscience. We still face the hard problem of consciousness. Science literally cannot fully explain how dead meat generates a subjective experience, which directly echoes Schelling's warning that mind and matter have to be seen as unified. In environmentalism, the debate over treating the Earth as dead resources versus a living ecosystem perfectly mirrors his point that nature is a living organism we have to respect. And in artificial intelligence, generative code is actively challenging our very definition of what creativity even is. Which brings us to a really perfect question to conclude this explainer. If AI only possesses conscious rules, statistics, and craft, but has absolutely no unconscious free soul, can it ever generate true art? Or are you firmly on Schelling's side here? As you ponder the limits of AI and modern science today, I want you to remember Schelling's ultimate lesson. You are not just some fleeting accident in a cold, dead universe. You are, quite literally, the universe beautifully opening its eyes to itself.
Please like and subscribe.